Hello, and welcome to this Joyful Minds video, recorded as part of the January 2021 Joyful Minds Transformation Summit. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe for more, and drop your thoughts and comments in the section below. Okay, welcome Joyful Minds community. I'm joined today by Melissa Haig. Hello, Melissa.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for joining today. So, for those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, my name is Sarah Watts. I am a transformational coach and founder of Joyful Minds. And I'm hosting this transformational summit across this week to give ideas, inspiration, tools, and techniques about how to make changes in your life. Hopefully, there'll be something amongst all of the different sessions that calls to you and speaks to you that you might then feel prompted to go and explore further. And today's session with Melissa is all around vulnerability. And I know that there's a lot of interest in this topic in the group. So I'm looking forward to getting into that with Melissa today. And before I do, let me just introduce you properly, Melissa. So, Melissa has said that she is an accomplished learning and development professional with over 20 years' experience across a number of industries in the public and private sector. She's passionate about the use of client-centered coaching, both with individuals and teams, to help them realize their potential and reach their goals. She's committed to the use of coaching conversations to help create cultures of empowerment and self-reliance in organizations. And Melissa also admits to being a huge fan of the work of Dr. Brene Brown. I'm a big fan too. And following that passion, which is amazing. In 2019, Melissa became a certified Dare to Lead facilitator. She uses this work to support people to develop their courage building skills, supporting them to face risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure with courage and clarity, live into their values, create and deepen connections in relationships, and learn and grow from the failures, setbacks, and disappointments that are inevitable when we are brave with our lives. Wow, I love that, Melissa. Thank you so much. So I'm sure we are joined by lots of Brene Brown fans. And, you know, the messages that Brene has kind of given out into the world around vulnerability and gratitude and courage, you know, it really feels like she speaks to you know, a void that was there before, you know, and her voice is so clear and compelling in the way that she tells her stories. So obviously you got to meet her when you went on training. Tell us, how was that?
It was phenomenal. As you said, I'm a self-confessed fan, I suppose, of Brene Brown and her talks and her work. And I kind of went in a little bit of awe, if I'm honest, when she arrived into the room. But I think what stuck with me through the time I got to spend with her is how she is exactly in person. She is exactly as you experience her on the screen, or however you kind of come across her work. She is an incredibly genuine and authentic person, and she believes in this work at her core. And I wonder what we did before Brene, right? How did we have conversations about courage and vulnerability before Brene came along? Because this stuff is not new, but she's given us language to help us really explore this stuff, and I'm certainly eternally grateful for that. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I feel very, very privileged and lucky to have been able to do it.
Yes, amazing. And for those, if there is anyone listening who hasn't come across Brene's work, do you want to just say a bit about what she does or how she got to this
Hmm.
point?
Yeah, so she is a researcher. She's a researcher by trade, if you like. She came from a social work background, and her work started really in terms of looking at shame, and investigating shame and understanding how it shows up in us and our relationships and how it impacts on our lives. And that kind of work has then expanded out into working with courage and vulnerability. She's written, I forget the number, but a lot of books now, which cover the whole process in terms of being brave with our lives, learning to rise, Daring Greatly, titles of books I'm sure a lot of the listeners have heard of. And then probably, I think it was about 10 years ago now, she took that work and started to apply it to organizational life and leadership. But what's interesting to me is it speaks to me not just in terms of organizational leadership, but also leadership of ourselves. We're all leaders. We all lead in our lives in one way or another. So I find all of her work translates really well into wherever you are working or whatever point you're at in your life. And her research continues. She's doing a lot of work now around emotional literacy. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see where her journey takes her.
Yes, absolutely. What an incredible journey. And I think, you're absolutely right, in terms of what we can learn about organizationally, it's also representative of what happens in our own lives. But organizations is where we spend a lot of our time, and also there's a long way to go in order to create that sort of psychologically safe workplace. But also, if we're committed to doing that at work, shouldn't we be committed to doing that at home too? So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this. So let's talk vulnerability then. So how would you describe vulnerability, and why is it so important when we think about transformational change?
Okay, so well, let's start with what is vulnerability, this word that we keep throwing around. What's the definition? So vulnerability is the emotion that we experience in times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It's an emotion that we all experience at one time or another, and probably more frequently sometimes than we probably admit even to ourselves. And what I know is that transformation, any kind of transformation, requires courage. And it's probably easiest to kind of try and get you and hopefully the listeners as well to feel it. So if you feel comfortable to close your eyes for a moment, okay, and I want you to try and remember the last time that you were brave in your life. And try and visualize that. Can you see it, in your mind's eye? Remember what it felt like to be brave. What were you feeling? What were you thinking? Maybe how you were behaving. And as you visualize that for yourself, as you visualize being brave and stepping into that courage, did that situation that you are imagining include some level of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. I've never done that exercise, and people are always, nobody ever says no. Everyone goes, yeah, absolutely, in different levels, different ways. Absolutely. When I'm courageous, when I'm called to be brave, there is absolutely vulnerability, uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And that's really one of the core messages that Brene gives us, is that you can't get to courage without rumbling with vulnerability. So if you're looking to change or transform yourself or something about your life in some way, you're absolutely going to face that paradox of feeling brave and afraid at exactly the same time. So you're going to have to face vulnerability as part of your journey towards transformation. And therefore, I think, for anyone who's wanting to transform themselves or their lives in some way, you've got to face this stuff and kind of face it head on and get really curious about it in order to drive that transformation forward and be courageous, right? Step into that brave self. Yeah.
Yeah, what really resonated with me, as you were sharing that, Melissa, is this idea that, it's the psychological threats that we have, so we know that our bodies are, designed in such a way to respond to threats, adrenaline and all that cortisol and everything else. But we're not, generally speaking, physically threatened. It's the psychological threats that we're experiencing. And what we perceive to be a threat is very individual, but can be very broad. It can be lots of different circumstances where that could take place. So we could be in that threat response quite a lot of the time. And so, what you're talking about in terms of, the times when we need to be vulnerable or are vulnerable through being brave and courageous might come up quite a lot.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. And it's the ability to feel the fear but do it anyway,
Mm.
which is easy for us to sit here and stay, but in the situation, in the circumstance, that sometimes is really tough. It's really hard to do. So yeah, I'm not here to tell you it's easy, I'm afraid,
Yes.
in any way, shape or form.
No, I mean, yeah, we talked at the start of the week about the hero's journey,
Mm.
and crossing the threshold and facing our demons, and bravery and courage, is absolutely required in every step of that journey. But the hero is transformed by the end of it, through having gone through that and come out the other side and realized that, they've changed, they've found themselves. And I think it was Robert Stevenson from Animas who said, I think his piece of advice was things are never as bad as you think they're going to be. So sometimes we can perceive this great battle that's going to happen that never happens. It's our idea about it that's created that.
Absolutely, we're meaning making beings, right? And we spend a lot of time, when we don't have data or information, we make up stories, and those stories sometimes are our own truth, but those stories also get in our way and can hold us back. So recognizing what those stories are is really important.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think some of the misconceptions are about vulnerability?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions. There are a fair few. In fact, Brene Brown talks about the myths of vulnerability, and she's identified 6 myths of vulnerability. And I think it's really useful actually to ask ourselves the question: I grew up believing that vulnerability was dot 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 dot,
Mm.
because quite often the beliefs that we hold about being vulnerability are formed, early in our lives, through childhood and as young adults. And one of the most common myths that Brene talks about, and that I find quite a lot when I'm doing this work with others, is this myth around vulnerability is weakness.
Mm.
I'm exposing myself. I'm showing you, like when dogs are being submissive, they roll over and show you their belly, and that's exposing, and it presents weakness. It gives people the opportunity to attack. And when I think about what I grew up believing around vulnerability, it's always interesting to me, because I think I grew up believing that vulnerability is really important, and it's it it's important. It's even brave in others, but it's weakness in me.
Mm.
And that's a great one of the kind of the annoying or great paradoxes of vulnerability. This idea that vulnerability in others looks like courage and bravery, but vulnerability in me is weakness. And when you kind of dig into this idea, you explore this idea of vulnerability being weakness, and where that's come from, and you think about your own experiences of vulnerability. So I do this a lot, thinking about, well, what does vulnerability look like to me, and in my life experiences. And for me, it's things like vulnerability is, or was, my first date after my divorce,
Mm.
my third and final IVF cycle,
Mm.
um, deciding that I wanted to start my own business, telling my boss that I wanted to start my own business. These are things that are real. Even as I remember them, I can feel that very visceral feeling of vulnerability. So, is vulnerability hard and uncomfortable and awkward? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it is. But is it weakness?
Mm.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's part of our human experience,
Mm.
and it is tough. It's really tough, but facing into it and understanding that vulnerability, and using our our support section, our support network, whether that's internal or external, to help us as we choose to be brave is really important. So yeah, there are lots of misconceptions out there, but the question I ask is, what did you grow up believing? You know, that's my first question, because that tells you something about your relationship with vulnerability.
Yeah, definitely. In me, the first thing that came up was weakness. And I don't rationally think that, but it's an instinct, isn't it, that's sort of ingrained into us. So, I guess it's an unlearning,
Yeah, for
unlearning
sure.
process.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And when we talk about the myths of vulnerability, one of the questions I ask people is, what is it that you need to unlearn? Now you know what you grew up believing. What is it that you now need to unlearn around those myths of vulnerability?
Yeah. So how do we do it? So we know that it's important. We know that we're going to be transformed as a result. And we know what the misconceptions are, but how do we do it well, rather than just sort of suffering through?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because it's the one that I get asked the most. Well, how do I do it? It's all very well, but come on, how do I actually do this, and how do I do it well? And I think the first thing, and I've said this already, but vulnerability is hard. It's really hard. So thinking that doing this work is going to make it easy for you is also a misconception, right? It is going to be hard, and it is going to be uncomfortable. So kind of just telling people, come on, be more vulnerable in your day-to-day life, it isn't going to work, because vulnerability, or feeling vulnerable, brings up lots of additional feelings around shame and scarcity, fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and people are like, whoa, I don't want to feel that stuff. I don't want to go there. Why should I feel those things? Why should I put myself into situations where I know I'm going to feel those things? And why on earth should I let anyone else see that? I don't want to show anyone else that stuff. Because ultimately, when we feel vulnerable, we armor up. Brene uses a lovely metaphor of this armor that we put on when we feel vulnerable, and that armor really is just about self-protection. That need to cover our bellies, back to that, thinking about the dogs, but we need to cover ourselves up so that we don't suffer, we don't feel pain or hurt. So for me, the first step towards kind of understanding your vulnerability and using it effectively to enable you to be courageous is to really develop your awareness of situations or moments in our lives when we put that armor on to protect ourselves. And Brene calls those the arena moments. I love this metaphor of the arena that she uses, which is kind of around, the arena is a metaphor for situations or moments in our lives where we show up and share something of ourselves, whether that's our ideas or our experiences, anything really, where we don't have any control of the outcome or what people will think of us. Those are kind of the arena moments, and they're the classic ones where we get that armor on. So what kind of situations or moments are arena moments for you? That's the first thing. Recognizing those, being aware of them, being aware of how you feel when you know an arena moment is coming. Imagining yourself with your hand on the door handle, ready to go into the arena. What's coming up for you? What armor do you feel the need to put on in order to protect yourself? Get really, really curious about your emotions and what they're saying to you, your triggers, the things that trigger that armoring up process. And recognizing that actually what this probably means is you're about to do something brave. You're about to step into your courage. And that is both exciting and terrifying at the same time. And that's okay. And I mentioned these kind of feelings that we get, with vulnerability, and they're not necessarily feelings that we want to feel or experience. And vulnerability is the birthplace of some really tough emotions, shame, fear, scarcity, those things I mentioned. But also, on the flip side of that, is vulnerability is also the birthplace of love and belonging and joy. So to get to that stuff, the real gold, the real stuff that we all want that in our lives, to be loved, to belong, and to feel joy, right? That vulnerability is your route to do that, to show up and be seen as who you are. So
Mm.
for me, in terms of kind of getting started, don't expect it to be easy. It will absolutely be hard. If you can find someone to be your kind of buddy with this work, you know, that can be really, really helpful. But just begin by being really curious about yourself and your emotions and your triggers and what that's telling you, and
Mm.
recognizing that that probably means you're about to do something brave, right?
I love that. I mean, I love her metaphors. You know, the armor. One of the things that she said that resonated with me about the armor is that we can't ever feel the connection that we're seeking when we're wearing armor, because the connection is built upon a false perspective of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. You know, unless we're really vulnerable, we aren't able to feel that connection in an authentic way.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, connection is really important. So that really resonates with me about this armor, you know. And we feel that, don't we, when we meet people and we connect with them? You know, we can relate to people who aren't wearing their armor, and we get a sense when someone is, you know, and get a bit wary perhaps, or just feel like, oh, you know, that person's not so easy to be with or relate to or connect with or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Um,
Mm.
and I love this idea of the arena moments. I think we can all think of arena moments. And
Definitely.
yeah, and it being the birthplace of all of those unwanted emotions, but all the, you know, all the good stuff too, the love, the belonging, the joy. We were learning with a mindfulness session around how to welcome in all emotions, how to welcome them all. There was a poem called The Guest House, around welcoming everything in, all those emotions, and allowing them to be transient, you know, because when we resist them, you know, they can get stuck. And when we welcome them in and allow them to pass, they do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, definitely. And I think it's so right in terms of that whole mixture of emotions. And here we're talking about, you know, some really difficult emotions and some stuff that's really powerful that we want as well. And it's kind of
Mm.
such a paradox for us to recognize that we're going to experience both. And also, I think that I find now that when I feel shame, or I have a sense of scarcity, or I'm afraid, immediately I'm thinking, this is interesting. This could be an arena moment.
Mm.
Okay, that I don't want to be in this. I'd like to run away. I'd like to get away from these difficult emotions, but I wonder if this is an arena moment. And it's that kind of awareness that you kind of want to build in yourself, I think.
Mm.
um, but yeah, it is difficult. And I think you will know this, Sarah, as a coach yourself. You know, one of the joys for me of being a coach is building that connection with people, where gradually you see them taking the armor off
Mm.
and just experiencing and being with them in those moments of vulnerability, of them feeling safe enough to take some of that armor off, and seeing what they discover as they do that. It's such a wonderful privilege to be able to do that as a coach. um so yeah, I feel very lucky.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Yeah, and there was a quote that came to mind as you were saying that. I think it's something along the lines of everything we want is on the other side of fear, or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, all the good stuff, all the things that really matter, you know, are on the other side of that threshold. You know, and it's not about making life difficult in order to kind of this thing to be more important, but it's saying that sometimes our hearts want for something, but our heads are scared,
Mm.
you know? And so which one are we gonna which one are we gonna pay attention to?
Yeah.
We can acknowledge what's going on, we can acknowledge the emotions that we're experiencing, but still go for what we want.
Mm.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, those being those arena moments. I love that.
Mm.
Okay, so let's talk about success stories.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us one of the biggest success stories that you've heard or you've witnessed around, you know, using vulnerability and courage?
Mm. Mm. I pondered this. I kind of thought, what shall I bring? And I settled on my own example, actually, because it was important to me to talk about this in a way that didn't imply that success is the end of the journey. Right, because this is such a constant thing that we're all working on, and I'm still working on. I'm leaning into it, and it's really hard, but I'm not there yet, and I know that. So my success story is around this, and I mentioned earlier on about this kind of deciding that I wanted to start my own business, and the reason for doing that, though, was that I wanted to do more of the work that I love. And I recognized that in the employed role that I was doing some of that work, but not enough of it. And I really struggled with that for some time, because I happen to work in an organization that I love. I love the people. I've been there a long time, and it felt really hard to actually say out loud, I don't know if this is right for me anymore. I want to do something different. So it took me a long time to open the door on the arena, without any doubt at all. I don't want to imply that I rocked up and got straight in there. It took me a long time. But actually, my arena moment came when I had that conversation with my boss that basically explained exactly what I've just explained to you. And I had absolutely no control of the outcome. I didn't know how he was going to take it, what his, how he would feel, how he would react, and what he would think, So it was a kind of classic arena moment. I mean, thankfully, the conversation went very well, and I'm blessed with a great relationship with my boss, so that certainly helped. But I think what's really interesting to me is that then catapulted me into a series of further arena moments. And thinking about, I'm now kind of lucky enough to be still part-time with my organization and doing some of my own work and doing more of the work that I love, and that I'm called to do. But there are still so many arena moments, because I'm constantly kind of when we stand in the arena. One of the things that Brene talks about is the different seats in the arena, who's sat in the arena, and who do you listen to. And I think, as a lot of people do, that I find myself listening to the critics sections, and the people, the season ticket holders that always show up in the arena, right? So, comparison. I'm not as good as that other coach, or my business model isn't as good, or even my brand doesn't look as sexy as theirs does. And, all of this comparison stuff, scarcity, is there going to be enough work out there for me? Is this sustainable? If I don't do this work, if I say no to this, what does that mean? It's always this kind of scarcity piece. And then kind of that shame, the thing around, who do I want to be as a coach? Who don't I want to be? How do I want to show up? And so that I find myself stood in my arena so often looking towards that critic section. And what I know now, what I'm learning to do through this work, is to turn towards my support section, which is empathy and self-compassion, mindfulness, the stuff that you mentioned in other sessions you've had. And who's in my support section? Who's the one cheering me on? What are they saying? What am I hearing from them, and how am I using that, rather than what I'm hearing from the critics? And I love that Brene talks about, if you are not in the arena with me, getting, covered in blood and mud, then I am not listening or open to your feedback. And I find there are a lot of people, when you're going through this kind of trying to find your way in your career or in your business, there are a lot of people who will stand on the sidelines and hurl advice and judgment. And I recognize now when I'm listening to them. It's not that I don't listen to them, I absolutely do, but I suddenly think, hang on, why am I listening to this person that's saying, if only I did this, I could have a six-figure business? Why am I listening to them? They don't hold the answers for me. So I'm learning to all the time, and most importantly, and it's the piece I mentioned about starting this work, is recognizing that you're in an arena moment. And I'm lucky enough to work with a coach who helps me to do that, because sometimes I don't even see it. Sometimes I don't even realize I'm in the arena. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm not sure it's a success story, because I don't know, success kind of suggests that we've got there, right? But I think that this work is ongoing. I think I'll be doing it forever. But hopefully, you know, practicing, getting curious about what's worked, what hasn't worked, getting curious about my emotions. And then this idea of learning to rise, you know, actually being able to pick myself back up and go again and try again, and learning and evolving and transforming with every new learning, right? So yeah.
Well, that to me sounds like success. I would agree with you. I don't think there is a destination. I don't think that the way, you know, our human condition doesn't lend itself to, I do these things and then I'm good. It's
I'm fixed, I'm done. Yeah.
I'm done now, I'm good, you know.
Yeah.
Like that. I think it's about getting yourself orientated onto the right path, and then the success is staying on it. You know, we get knocked down, we get back. I think that's a song. But like you say, you know, it's just getting back up.
Yeah,
Getting back up and keep going. And not giving up on, you know, the things that you want in life. You know, I keep referring back to our hero. I do love a hero's journey. We keep referring back to the hero's journey. You know, what if Luke Skywalker had stayed on Tatooine as a farmer? You know, what would have happened then? You know, if Harry hadn't have gone to Hogwarts, what would have happened?
Yeah.
You know, it's just, we have a choice, don't we? We follow our hearts to create whatever it is that we really would love to have in our lives, in our careers, in our business, in our relationships, in our health, whatever it might be. And then that stuff comes up, you know, that the arena moments, as you call it. And, you know, for me, success is being able to meet that and keep going. So, yes, thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Not at all.
Okay, so I do have some quick fire questions, but I'm going to ask the community if they have anything that they would like to ask. Now, there is a bit of a time delay between Facebook and Zoom.
Okay.
So let's see if anyone has had the chance yet to hear me say that. Here we go. So let's see if... Right, so we've got a few people saying hello. Hello, Amanda. Hello, Claire.
Hello.
Pam.
Hello.
Hi, Anna. Oh, Nathan's on.
Oh, hello, Nathan.
Hi, Nathan. So for those of you listening, Melissa and I met through Nathan, a common friend, and then we became friends. So thanks for that, Nathan.
Good job.
Yeah. Andre saying she's a big Brene Brown fan.
Good. Kindred spirit. Love it.
Spirit. Anna is saying that she grew up believing that being vulnerable is a weakness. Yeah, I think that's going to be
so common. It is so common.
Such a common thing here, isn't it? Maggie is saying fall 7 times, rise 8, and a muscly arm. Okay, so Claire's asking, which order would you recommend reading the books in?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question. So, well, it sort of depends, because, you know, there are some purists who probably say read them in the order that they came out, right? I kind of feel like you read them in the order that they grab your attention. I mean, I think that Daring Greatly and Learning to Rise are the obvious pairing, if you like. They go well together. And the way that Brene describes it is that if you imagine that Daring Greatly and Learning to Rise are the parents, and they had a child, which is the Dare to Lead book, and that Dare to Lead, then that book then went to business school. that's where we got Dare to Lead. So it kind of brings those two bits together in an organizational context. So that's the triangle of those three. But there's also Gifts of Imperfection is one of my favorites. It's one of the first ones I read. And also one of her earlier books on shame. It's called I Thought It Was Just Me, but it isn't. You know, is a really good dive into shame, which is a really tough emotion to get to grips with. So I don't know that there's a right order. That's how I read Daring Greatly, Learning to Rise. I also then read Brave in the Wilderness, and then got to Dare to Lead. So whichever one grabs you, I say.
Yeah, go with the one that calls for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Andrea said, what's been your biggest arena moment and what did you learn from it?
Well, what has been my biggest arena moment? Well, other than the one that I've shared around kind of my working life, my business life, starting my own business, I'm trying to think of a different one actually, because there are lots. I guess the other one I might, which is more of a one in my personal life, is that I recognize that kind of arena moment of, and some people in who are listening in may well have experienced this as well, but kind of going through that journey of relationship breakdown into divorce, you know, being honest about that, being open. I remember telling my parents that I wanted to get a divorce, and I just felt so that I disappointed them. And anyway, that was a huge arena moment. But actually for me, the next one, which I'm, you know, can talk more positively about perhaps, because it's led to a second very, very happy marriage with my soulmate, is that learning to rise, right? Picking yourself back up and getting back into the arena, because love is one of the most vulnerable things that we will ever do. You know, you think about those of you who are kind of listening in, you know, you probably all loved someone, you probably all lost someone, and you know that is just, you know, one of the most vulnerable things that you can do. So outside of work life and in my personal life, I think that those are probably my other real big arena moments. But I probably, do you know what, right back then I might not have known that they were arena moments, but I look back now and I am proud of my bravery, I think, even though it was hard.
Yeah, and we grow a little bit each time, don't we? Or a lot, you know. It's the little shifts and it's the big shifts. You know, all of them culminate on our journey.
Yeah, for sure.
So Karen says, Melissa, you are a true ambassador for Brene Brown. I love her books. You're simply brilliant. And thank you, Sarah, for sharing fabulous guest speakers. Thank you for being here, Melissa. And she's got Sarah Cooper to thank for letting her know about this event. Well, thanks for being here, Karen. And thanks to everybody who's watching. Okay, so I don't think there's any more questions, but I have a few left, just quick fire ones I've been asking all of our guest speakers.
Brilliant.
So the first one is, what's your favorite mantra or quote?
Oh, well, there are so many, and I'm going to have to pick a Brene Brown one, right? But there's so many. I think one of my favorites is owning our story, and loving ourselves through the process is the bravest thing we will ever do.
Oof, yeah.
That's it's a quote, but it's sort of a mantra as well. So yeah, good old Brene. If you need a pick-me-up quote, a courage building quote, just Google Brene Brown quotes. Trust me, there'll be one that speaks to you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, we love her. Okay, which book has had the greatest impact on you and why?
Well, I mentioned it actually when asking the question about which ones to read first. And the first book I read of Brene Brown's was the Gifts of Imperfection. And it had and that was before I, you know, had met her and done all this work I've since done. And it had such an impact on me. It has these 10 guideposts for wholehearted living. I didn't even know what wholehearted living meant really before I read the book. But what it did for me was it dispelled a limiting belief I carried around perfectionism, which I think is quite a common one. A lot of people probably identify with it. So it helped me to move away from my perfectionist self. But I think most importantly, it's that book that began my love affair with Brene Brown, and it's a love affair that has transformed my life in so many ways. So I'm grateful to that one book for that, if nothing else. But I'd really encourage everyone, if you haven't, on her website, there's a gifts hub, which has kind of got loads of really great resources around the gifts of imperfection. So her website's great. Go have a look. There's loads of stuff on there.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the last question then is, what one learning have you had that you would share with humanity?
I was thinking that one of the things that we talk about, I think I might have briefly mentioned it, but one of the things that we talk about a lot in the Dare to Lead work is around empathy and self-compassion.
Mm.
And self-compassion is something that I'm working on. I continue to work on. It's not as strong as I would like it to be, that's for sure. But one of the things that we look at is the work of Kirsten Neff, who's done quite a lot of work around self-compassion. You've probably heard of her, Sarah. And one of the things she talks about is this idea of common humanity versus isolation.
Mm.
And for me right now, where we are all at, you know, in the way the world is at the moment with the pandemic and all sorts of other things going on, I just think this idea of recognizing that, you know, suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience.
Mm.
You know, it's something that we all go through, rather than being something that just happens to me alone. And I've been reminded of that over the last 12 months, that, you know, I'm not alone. I
Mm.
seem to have, you know, I've spent a lot of time in this office physically on my own. And I think it's so important to remind ourselves of that sense of common humanity, and we are not alone. There is no reason for people to, particularly if they're thinking about transformation and change, there is no reason to go it alone,
Mm.
because other people will have experienced similar things, who can support you. So
Yeah.
yeah, common humanity versus isolation.
Mm.
That's what I would share.
I love that so much. I often share with people the moment when I realised that it wasn't just me, and it was a good few years ago. And I was at a Tony Robbins event, and there was 14,000 people in the room. Like, you can't really quite imagine that many people, but they're all in this massive room. And he says, "Put your hands up if you felt like you've not been at some point you felt like you've not been good enough." And the whole
Oh,
stadium put the hand up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought it was just me. It's clearly not. It's
it's
clearly
such a
everyone.
powerful experience, isn't it? It's such a powerful experience when that happens. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
And the power of being with others and connecting, the community that we're all now in, was founded off the kind of vision of that, really, and that, we can go further when we go together, and having support from people who are like-minded and like-hearted, and we're able to take that armor off, and build true connections and support. The power that comes from that is incredible. And now more than ever, we need that, don't we?
Oh,
You
for
know?
sure, for sure. And it's the piece that I hope that we all hold on to and take forward.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yes. Well, we're all changed as a result of this last year, aren't we? So let's focus on those positive things.
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So how might people connect with you if they want to?
So the best way is probably to connect with me on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn, and my email address and so on is all on that LinkedIn profile. If you're not on LinkedIn, if that's not your thing, then you can just drop me an email. I'm melissa@melissahaig.com. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, drop me an email, and yeah, I love making connections, and as you probably all can tell, I love talking about anything to do with Brene Brown, and courage and vulnerability. So I'm always up for a conversation. So yeah, please connect. I'd love that.
Amazing. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you to everyone who's joining us live, watching this live, and also to any of you who are watching on a replay. And we'll see you tomorrow. We've got a session at 12 o'clock tomorrow, all about living intuitively and the difference that makes to your life. So I will see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Melissa. If you'd like to get in touch, drop me an email or contact me on one of the social media platforms. And if you'd like to find out more information about working with me, check out the services that I offer on my website, joyfulminds.co.uk. And I look forward to meeting you soon.